Before we get started, first of all, I think I will finish Julius Caesar today, so we'll get on to Antony Cleopatra next time. Again, I might spill over a bit into the next class. If you're interested in seeing Julius Caesar, there are two films of it. The easiest way to search is by the Mark Antony. Marlon Brando plays Mark Antony in one of them, and Charlton Heston in the other. I'm sure they're available on Netflix. They're good, solid versions. Both are heavily cut, and so whole scenes are omitted. They're a little too frigid. I think they're so concerned with being classical that there's almost a marble-like quality to the acting. But they're decent versions. They're not modern dress. Again, I haven't seen the whole of the Ralph Fiennes Coriolanus. I luckily got a defective copy and had to stop after Act 1. It seemed terrible to me, completely misconceived by being set in Bosnia. But these are both very much set in ancient Rome, and they hired the Spanish army to do it. But so I do recommend them. They won't ruin the plays for you. Then let's see. On the final exam, we got some good news and bad news. The bad news is that we lost the lottery, and it's December 21st, the last day. Have you seen that? December 21st in the morning. Fortunately, I signed a lease that goes through December 22nd, so I'll be here. The good news is, according to the Mayan calendar, the world will end on that day. So the ad board has said if the world ends before 9:40 a.m., you don't have to take the exam. But if it goes longer than that, the apocalypse, then you'll have to take it. But it'll be the last thing you'll ever do, and who cares? But anyway, for those of you who believe in the Mayan calendar, it's a little ominous there. But anyway, we'll handle that. Finally, I did put up as an announcement the first paper assignment. I gather some of you have seen it already. Yes? Okay, so if there are any questions, read it over, and then if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to talk to any of you about writing the papers. That's why my office hours are before, and you can talk to your TFs about it. So anyway, an effort to get you started, especially on reading the Machiavelli for that. I think that's all the announcements. And again, I think the sections seem to be working. And any problems with the course we need to discuss? If you're still having problems with your section time, come see me after class. Okay, let's get going on Julius Caesar here. And the issue I was trying to set up last time is very basic to human life and to Shakespeare's drama. Do human beings make history, or does history make human beings? In many ways, the premise of Shakespearean drama, and of much drama, is that human beings make history. Shakespearean tragedy deals with those men and women who make history. They don't have to be world historical individuals in Hegel's sense, but they got to make a difference. This is the magnitude Aristotle speaks of when he says that a tragic hero has to have a certain magnitude. I think the Greek word is megathos there, which is from the word for great, and so a certain greatness. Tragic heroes are people who matter. Their stories are so important because they have an effect that goes beyond just their individual lives. They are the people who make history. And we see this in Shakespeare's history plays. We see it in his tragedies. But there is another view of human life, which is perhaps more prevalent in the modern world, that history makes human beings, by which I mean that no individual human being makes that much of a difference. There are broader social, economic forces. Those are what determine the currents of history. And you can see why the story of Julius Caesar really helps to focus this issue. On the one hand, this story seems to be a great example of the idea that individual human beings make a difference. Surely that's the case of Julius Caesar. He is presented as this extraordinarily great human being who's outdone everyone else in his time, who has risen to this position of preeminence, who wins battles against the Gauls, against the Spaniards, against his fellow Romans, no matter what. Like Coriolanus, he's the man who makes the individual difference on the battlefield. Moreover, the conspirators hold him responsible for all the problems in Rome. The reason Rome is ceasing to be a republic, the reason why it's veering off into dictatorship and tyranny is this one damn guy, Julius Caesar, and the premise of the conspiracy is if we could eliminate him, we'd be fine. And by the same token, if we did it, we would be great Romans. We would be worthy, notice specifically, we would be worthy of representation in drama. How many ages hence shall our lofty act be acted o'er in states unborn and accents yet unknown? Will be the subjects of Shakespeare's drama. So there's this overwhelming sense in the play that individual human beings make a difference, and it's the great Roman principle. It's the principle of the Republic, of which Coriolanus was such a good example. But there are counter movements in the study of Roman history, which suggests that Rome was moving inevitably from republic to empire at this point, that Rome was destined to one-man rule. Shakespeare would have found this position in Plutarch. I wasn't able to locate it in your edition, but from a fuller edition, Plutarch says at one point, "Howbeit the state of Rome, in my opinion, being now brought to that pass that it could no more abide to be governed by many lords, but required one only absolute governor, God, to prevent Brutus that it should not come to his government, kept this victory from his knowledge." So he's basically saying God, probably in the Greek it says the God, prevented Brutus from winning because it was inevitable that one man would end up ruling Rome. Now later, Plutarch writes in the life of Antony, "For it was predestined that the government of all the world should fall into Octavius Caesar's hands." There we see the propaganda aspect of this claim. Plutarch may have genuinely believed that Rome was headed inevitably towards one-man rule at this stage. But in any case, writing as a captive Greek under Roman imperial rule, he had reasons to support at least the myth that Octavius Caesar was destined to rule Rome as the new emperor. This was a myth that Octavius, under his new name Augustus, actively cultivated. Virgil's Aeneid was written to support just this myth, that traditionally Roman history had led away from kingship and one-man rule. Founding idea of the Republic was we're getting rid of foreign kings, we're no longer going to have kings. Virgil's Aeneid is a massive propaganda effort to get Romans to rethink that, to think that from the beginning Rome was destined to one-man rule. It's descended from a Trojan monarchy, it was founded by one man, Aeneas, and all of it was headed towards Octavius becoming emperor. So Shakespeare was certainly aware of the counter view that somehow the prevailing of Caesar's party was predestined. It's connected to the notion of the corruption of Rome. There's the idea the Republic was great for a couple of centuries, but by now, by the time the play of the Julius Caesar, the city is so corrupt that a republican rule can no longer function. The corruption is largely a result of Rome's own success. We've talked about this. Its conquest of the world brought in so much wealth, and wealth corrupted Rome. It corrupted the patricians, who became overly concerned with maintaining and increasing their wealth. They used their wealth to corrupt Roman politics by buying these offices, the office of tribune, the office of consul. They would just put money into it and get either themselves or their followers appointed. And of course, we see the plebeians as corrupt now. The Roman Republican regime is no longer functioning because people aren't playing the roles they were supposed to play. The tribunes have been bought out, and those who haven't, like Flavius Morus, are killed off. If you just go to page 4 at the beginning of the play, you see that in our first view of Rome and our first view of the plebeians, they have bad souls. Now, this is the top of page 4, so Act 1, Scene 1, about line 15. Now, that's a pun, because we have here a shoemaker who is a mender of bad souls. But when you hear a play begin with the notion that there are bad souls in Rome and they need mending, that may tell you something. And what's more, when the tribune asks the cobbler why he's out leading a mob, he says, this is line 31, "Truly, sir, to wear out their shoes to get myself into more work." So the public and private interests no longer coincide in Rome. It's now in the private interest of this cobbler that the citizens of Rome have bad souls. In a way that tells you the problem from the beginning here. And it is, it's the great, there's no simple answer to this question. I think Shakespeare captures the ambiguity of it. There's much evidence to suggest that Rome was inevitably headed towards an empire here. Nevertheless, Shakespeare shows, you can't help thinking, if they'd killed Mark Antony, if they'd had Cicero join the conspiracy, if they hadn't let Mark Antony speak seconds, you keep saying, well, they made mistakes. This could have been salvaged. But maybe no. Maybe at most it could have been delayed. And let me stress that this process of tending towards one-man rule had been going on for at least 100 years at this point in Rome, as one figure after another rose to prominence, Pompey just before Caesar, and so on. Now, again, we'll see the consequences of this when we turn to Antony and Cleopatra. So we're at a great turning point here. In Act 3 of Julius Caesar, we're in the central act of the central play of this historical trilogy I'm creating for you. And this is the moment when the Republican and the Caesarian parties meet, and the Caesarian party prevails, and from here on, Rome is headed to being an empire. It all turns on a couple of speeches, and that's very appropriate. We have seen that rhetoric dominates as a mode in Coriolanus and Julius Caesar. Rhetoric is appropriate to a Republican regime. Now, again, both plays are written in poetry, but in this case, the rhetorical mode prevails over what we normally think of as the lyrical mode. Let me just give you an example of that. Again, we tend not to have the kind of soliloquies which we love in Shakespeare. Turn to page 25. This would be Act 2, Scene 1. Brutus having a soliloquy, line 10, that is thinking to himself, "It must be by his death, and for my part I know no personal cause to spurn him." Notice how it begins. It begins with its conclusion. It must be by his death. To be or not to be does not begin, "It must be by my death." The great soliloquies in Shakespeare, the ones we remember, are the ones where we hear a character searching for the truth. To be or not to be, that is the question. Or in Macbeth, "If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly." If the assassination could trammel up the consequences and catch with his surceased success. But here, upon this banquet show of time, we jump to life to come. That is, we'll be seeing shortly these characters from a later age in Shakespeare who genuinely explore the depths of their interior souls. Shakespeare's Romans, by comparison, tend to lack that interiority, so that even in talking to himself, Brutus begins with his conclusion here and then goes on to justify it, so much so that on the next page, 26, line 28, we hear, "And since the quarrel will bear no color for the thing he is, fashion it thus." This is a very rhetorical soliloquy. The issue is not getting at the truth, because Brutus assumes he already has it. The issue is packaging the truth, as if he's already composing his speech here. It's a quarrel. Since the quarrel will bear no color for the thing he is, fashion it does. Let's make the argument this way. So this is a man searching not for what's the truth, but for how he can present the truth in a way that will be convincing. There's a tremendous limitation to Shakespeare's Republic and Romans, and you see it here in the way even their soliloquies generally take the form of speeches to themselves. They lack self-knowledge because they lack the ability to wrestle with themselves and struggle with their beliefs, as we'll see Hamlet, Othello, and Macbeth do. There's a particularly good example of that on page 8. This is Act 1, Scene 2, about line 50. Little dialogue between Cassius and Brutus that's the preamble to Cassius's attempt to get Brutus into conspiracy. Tell me, good Brutus, can you see your face? No, Cassius, for the eye sees not itself, but by reflection, by some other things. 'Tis just, and is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you might see your shadow. The issue here is self-knowledge. As I've shown thus far and will show again today, both Cassius and Brutus are sorely lacking in self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, which is the most philosophical activity. It's what Socrates called for, know thyself. It was the guiding principle of Socratic philosophy. And as we've seen, Brutus and Cassius profess to be philosophers, but they have turned their philosophies into something political, and their philosophies turn out to be at odds with some of their most basic opinions. We're going to see that reiterated at the time of their deaths today. That means they really don't know themselves. They think they're Cassius thinks he's an Epicurean, but he really isn't. Brutus thinks he's a Stoic, but he really isn't. Now, I call your attention to this passage because it's very interesting, but also because this may be one of the few quotations from Plato in Shakespeare. I'm talking about a dialogue here called the Alcibiades I, which was so popular it had a sequel, the Alcibiades II. I'm just going to read you a quick passage from this. This is Socrates talking to that marvelous young boy, Alcibiades. Consider in your turn, suppose that instead of speaking to a man, it said to the eye of one of us as a piece of advice, see thyself. Speaking to an eye, see thyself. How should we apprehend the meaning of the admonition? Would it not be that the eye should look at something and looking at which it would see itself? Clearly. Then let us think what object there is anywhere by looking at which we can see both it and ourselves. Why, clearly, Socrates, Alcibiades answers, mirrors and things of this sort. It's almost the same passage there. The question is, can the eye see itself? And the answer is that it can only do it through a mirror. Now, this is those who've noticed this have been puzzled by it. How did Shakespeare know this? It may have been indirectly. It may mean that when Ben Jonson said that Shakespeare knew a little Latin and less Greek, he was able to read a Platonic dialogue. Anyway, there's one other point that I know of in one of the Henry IV plays where Shakespeare appears to quote Plato. I just mention it because it is some evidence that he was familiar with Plato even at the level of the Greek text. We're going to see the soliloquy mode and the issue of self-knowledge explode in Antony and Cleopatra as this whole world we're looking at changes. But again, in the Republic, we're still in the world of rhetoric, and that is very appropriate to a republic. A republic is a community in which all the people in one way or another participate in political life, and so you really need rhetoric. And as we've been seeing in Coriolanus and Julius Caesar, again and again the issue is persuasion. People are trying to persuade people to do what's right for the city, and so they need rhetoric. And so it is not accidental that this play should build up to a great speech contest between Brutus and Mark Antony. It's interesting that the two speeches are fantastic. Brutus gives a very convincing speech, convincing even to the Roman populace, and then Mark Antony just blows him away. And it's just wonderful to see that Shakespeare is able to create a very convincing speech and then create an uber-convincing speech that overcomes what Brutus said. There's no historical record of these speeches. There's a historical record that they took place, but it is odd that no one in the ancient world attempted to reproduce them or come up with versions of them. It is interesting that Shakespeare did work from certain hints. If you look at page 146 in your signet, you have one of the right excerpt. Plutarch says very early in the life of Brutus, this is the second paragraph on 146, he was properly learned in the Latin tongue and was able to make long discourse in it. Besides that, he could also plead very well in Latin. But for the Greek tongue, they do note in some of his epistles that he counterfeited that brief, compendious manner of speech as the Lacedaemonians. Which means there's a certain Spartan character of speech. And then skipping a couple lines, Plutarch cites this, another time again unto the Samians, your counsels be long, your doings be slow, consider the end. That's actually very much like the Brutus speech that Shakespeare creates. These very clipped, laconic phrases. And by the same token, Plutarch describes Antony's rhetoric as Asiatic, which means over the top, hyperbolic, overdone, which very much characterizes his rhetoric. So, we've got these two speeches here, and at first, things appear as if they're going to turn on the issue of reason. And that's what you expect in a republic. Rhetoric is public reasoning. And indeed, it's what Antony asked for. This is back on page 55, so Act 3, Scene 1. When he agrees to be friends with them, line 220, Act 3, Scene 1, friends am I with you and love you all, upon this hope that you shall give me reasons why and wherein Caesar was dangerous. Seems like a perfectly decent demand, and it's what gives Brutus confidence that they can let Antony speak. For Antony, he's a reasonable man. And indeed, Brutus says at line 237, I will myself into the pulpit first and show the reason of our Caesar's death, as if that were sufficient. If you could show that this act was reasonable in publicly defensible rhetoric, you would be fine. And then Shakespeare's actually merciless here, page 58. So Act 3, Scene 2, about line 9. The second plebeian says, I will hear Cassius and compare their reasons when severally we hear them render it. How much more could you ask for? This is a rational body politic here, that the common people are there to compare reasons, as if they're philosophical, as if this is a graduate seminar here in Rome. And indeed, we have seen that the plebeians are remarkably reasonable or willing to listen to reason. We saw it in the opening of Coriolanus. We've seen that they will patiently listen even to their class enemies. And so you get some sense here of what made the Republic survive as long as it did. A certain minimal level of rationality and disposition to listen to reason on the part of the plebeians. And of course, Brutus then proceeds to give a very reasonable speech. Now, Shakespeare exaggerates this by offering Brutus' speech in prose and Antony's speech in poetry. That is, Antony's speech is by and large in iambic pentameter, the standard meter of Shakespeare's dramatic verse. Brutus quite pointedly, I think, speaks here in prose. Again, Shakespeare may have been guided here by those little hints in Plutarch. And he makes a very bare bones argument. It's like he's got a series of PowerPoints here. And he's got some good lines. Again, don't think that this is just a bad speech. I mean, that's a top of 59, line 20. Not that I love Caesar less, but I love Rome more. That's a great line. Indeed, had you rather Caesar were living and die all slaves than that Caesar were dead to live all free men? And you see, the rhetoric of the speech is very much the rhetoric of Republican Rome. It's the very rhetoric that Cassius used to stir Brutus up. Do you want to be free? We're threatened with being slaves here. The problem, I think, surfaces when you see a line is, who is here so base that would be a bondman? If any speak, for him have I offended. I could hear some guy piping up from the back row, hey, I am a bondman. Or, who would be so, hey, I am a slave. Wait a minute, what's in this for me? That is, in some ways, this speech is addressed by a patrician to patricians in the rhetoric of old patrician Rome. And who is here so rude that would not be a Roman? There's a lot of rude people out in the crowd, as we learned. So you see again Brutus's idealism here, that you can appeal to a set of principles, and that's all you need to do. And it does seem at first to work. Live, Brutus, live, bring him with triumph home into his house. It shows you that the old Roman rhetoric is still alive, that you still can appeal to the principle of Republican freedom. But then turn to page 60, the very top, so about line 50. Give him a statue with his ancestors, okay, that's Julius Brutus, who expelled the Tarquin kings. And then the end of the Republic, let him be Caesar. When you hear that line, in some deeper sense, the Republic is doomed. If you want to make the argument that one-man rule was inevitable, you see it here in that all the plebeians want is a one-man ruler. In some ways, they don't care who it is. So if it's not going to be Julius Caesar, let it be Brutus. Caesar's better parts should be crowned in Brutus. This is obviously a complete misinterpretation of everything that Brutus was trying to say in the speech. And of course, it's the first definitive moment when Julius Caesar's personal family name becomes a title. Let him be Caesar. Oddly enough, we've seen Brutus already say our Caesar to Mark Antony. We definitely watched this name be transformed into a title. Remember, I've been saying all along, the title of Rex, of king, was verboten in Republican Rome. The reality, maybe not so much. And it was the genius of this man, Octavius Caesar, who became Augustus, to understand that. And he never took the name of Rex in Rome. He took the name of emperor, which is from a Roman term, imperator, which basically means general of an army. To have the imperium, to be the imperator, was to be in charge of an army. And that's where we get the word emperor. We now think of emperor as a big deal, emperor higher than king. This was a euphemism originally. Oh, I'm not your king, I'm just your imperator. I'm just running the armies. And Octavius was very smart at this. He took the title of tribune. He took the title of consul. He took the title of imperator. Never called himself Rex. Because that was one of the Romans didn't want a Rex. One man ruling them, okay. Just don't call him a king. Call him a Caesar. And you see that happen here. It's a very remarkable moment Shakespeare takes us from the Republic to the Empire in space of 2 pages. I will hear Cassius and compare their reasons is the Republic. Let him be Caesar is the Empire. It's in a sense remarkable how fast it happens. Any questions thus far? Okay, now Antony's speech, we've discussed a good bit of it already because I used it to illustrate the Caesarian principles. He uses emotion, he uses appealing to the crowd's greed, he uses the will. As we've seen, the price of Republican freedom is 75 drachmas. The speech is just a magnificent example of rhetoric. One of the most effective rhetorical devices is denying that they're rhetorical. I am no orator, as Brutus is. Watch out when anybody says that to you. I'm just a homespun guy who doesn't know what I'm talking about. But the obvious nature of the speech is its emotional character. And here we see emotion replace reason as the heart of Roman rhetoric, and in a way it is the emergence of an imperial rhetoric to replace the Republican rhetoric. Brutus's speech is the last gasp of Republican rhetoric. He appeals to reason, he appeals to the good of Rome, to the public good of Rome. Antony goes straight for the jugular here. You're each getting 75 drachmas and the use of Caesar's park. You know, what's in it for you? And of course, it's a tremendously emotional speech. He whips the characters up into a frenzy. As we've seen, he bears Caesar's wounds in a really shameless way. Coriolanus wouldn't even bear his own wounds, but now you see people, and you know, look at page 65, line 200. Oh, piteous spectacle! That's what Antony offers the Roman people. He appeals to their pity. He appeals to spectacle. Now, you probably don't know it, but look good. This is the last you're going to see of the plebeians. They have one more scene after this, not the plebeians at their best, and then they're going to disappear from these plays entirely in Acts 4 and 5 and throughout Antony and Cleopatra. They will be referred to in Antony and Cleopatra, but only as theatrical spectators. Cleopatra will be very upset that her story will be staged before the smelly plebeians. This is a very important moment. It is the last moment of activity on the part of the plebeians. They will pass into passivity here. You can say that they do make the decision here between Republic and Empire. This is the moment when they, in effect, vote for Caesarism. They will use their last act of being active citizens to, in effect, vote themselves into being passive subjects. From here on, they will have no further say in the Republican regime, and indeed in the Roman regime, and indeed the rulers will just ignore them and give them bread and bread and circuses. They will just stage things for them to keep them happy. And you can see the whole Caesarian policy here in Antony's behavior here. It's to use the emotion, to whip up the emotions of the plebeians in order to leave himself and Octavius in charge of Rome and to defeat the last representatives of the Republican principles in Rome. And, you know, again, as I said, he literally descends to the level of the people to gain them on his side. And triumphs again and again in this speech by one emotional appeal after another. And the results we see in the next scene. This scene, which, you know, again, this is a terrifyingly prophetic scene of mobs in history ever since. That is, what Antony has done is unleashed a mob here. The plebeians enter this scene as members of the constitutional regime and leave it as a mob. And here on page 67, So Act 3, Scene 2, about line 262. Now let it work, mischief thou art afoot, take thou what course thou wilt. This is the surrender to history now. Let history take its course. Now, in Shakespeare's day, people still didn't have our sense of history with a capital H. That is a force that's somehow independent of human beings. But you see, in effect, that idea here. And notice the passivity of this, even in the word it. Now let it work. That vagueness is very ominous. Now let it work. It's really saying, I wash my hands of this. Mischief thou art afoot. Take thou what course thou wilt. This is a kind of fatalism. We'll talk about it a bit in some detail in a few minutes. But in any case, it is now characteristic of the imperial world that emerges at this moment. That there are forces out there which are no longer centered on individual human beings who behave rationally and act responsibly. No, there's this sense it's everything we mean by a mob. People acting collectively where there is no personal responsibility anymore. And poor Cinna the poet feels it immediately. When another dreamer, page 68, the first line of Act 3, Scene 3, I dreamt tonight that I'd feast with Caesar. And he wanders out in view of his dreams, and he wanders to his death because the mob mistakes him for Cinna the conspirator. And this is very emblematic. These are people who now take names for things. It's characteristic of mobs. And I do not think Shakespeare was indifferent to the fact that Cinna is a poet. That is, the first thing this mob does is to kill a poet. I don't think Shakespeare was in favor of killing poets. And notice they interrogate him. It's a kind of inquisition. Page 68. What is your name? Whither are you going? Where do you dwell? Are you a married man or a bachelor? Answer every man directly. I am briefly, wisely. I am truly you were best. It's almost like the tribunals of the French Revolution or any form of totalitarianism where the individual citizen is put on trial by the city now in the form of a mob, and he says, what is my name, whither I'm going, where do I dwell, am I married man or bachelor? Then to answer every man directly and briefly, wisely and truly, wisely I say, I'm a bachelor. Don't go the wise guy route with angry mobs. Again, I'm trying to teach you some important life lessons in this class. And indeed, that's as much as to say they are fools that marry. You'll bear me a bang for that. This is sort of like Socrates in the city, if you think about it. That is, here's this figure with a different way of life. And the city wants an account of him. And basically the account is, are you with us or against us? Where do you dwell? Where are you going? What's your name? So all these things that the political community wants to know of you. And he does give a wise-ass answer here. That I can sum it all up by saying I'm a bachelor. And the second plebeian does not miss the point. That's as much as to say they are fools that marry. This is a kind of Socratic moment here where the poet, the philosopher, stands up for something different. I'm a bachelor and you guys are married. And the mob doesn't like that. Because basically these questions come down to, are you with us or against us? And we learn the poet is against us. And so when he gives tear him to pieces, he says, conspirator, I'm Cinna the poet, I'm Cinna the poet. Tear him for his bad verses. Tear him for his bad verses. That is so perfect there of how mobs operate. And this is what the mob amounts to. It now, it's unthinking. It is mob-like in that it only wants people of its own stripe, and it's willing to suppress and kill anyone who's different in the city. And again, I think it's not inconsequential that this is a poet. that is being killed here. It really, I mean, it looks ahead to the French Revolution, to Soviet communism, to all the show trials, the 20th century, to the whole idea that anyone who thinks differently in the community will just be killed when he can't stand up to the Inquisition, to the sort of show trial. It's amazing that Shakespeare compresses one scene. Both films omitted, by the way. A real tribute to the density of Hollywood filmmakers. So, any questions about that? Okay, then. So, once that mob is set loose, it's really hard to argue that the Republic can be saved. I mean, what we basically see in Act 3 is the triumph of emotion over reason, and the triumph of emotional rhetoric over rational rhetoric, the triumph of emotion over Republican principle. And the consequences are quite startling when we turn to Act 4. This is another one of those moments where Shakespeare just hits us in the face with something. The cuts in Shakespeare are they're as fine as in any modern movie. There was no scenery in the Elizabethan theater, so they never had to pause to change scenery. And Shakespeare had a real feel for that. He liked rapid cuts where you could just juxtapose two moments. And we have just seen the Caesarian party under the leadership of Mark Antony triumph, and the consequences are already evident on page 70 at the beginning of Act 4. Where Antony Octavius and the third stooge, Lepidus, is meeting here. These many men then shall die, their names are pricked. Your brother too must die. Consent you, Lepidus? I do consent. Prick him down, Antony. Upon condition, Publius shall not live, who is your sister's son, Mark Antony. He shall not live. Look, with the spot I damn him. And it's incredible. They are drawing up a proscription list of all the patricians who need to be killed to establish the Caesarian regime. Among them, later we will learn, is Cicero, the greatest philosopher Rome ever produced, which again suggests my parallels to Socrates here may not be totally off the wall. And remember that the conspirators didn't want to shed too much blood. At least under Brutus's leadership, they decided, let's kill only Mark Antony. Now, again, we're getting to see one of these scenes that's so prophetic of the 20th century, or again, even of the French Revolution, these lists of people who the regime executes for being enemies of the regime. And of course, we see how cold-blooded it is. Octavius tells Lepidus that his brother has to die. And Lepidus says, okay, provided Mark Antony's nephew gets on the list. And just the cold-bloodedness is emphasized. Again, you can do this nicely in a production, just having them sitting there like bureaucrats now. They've got these lists and checking off the people who are going to be killed. And then the incredible line 8, fetch the will, Lepidus, go you to Caesar's house, fetch the will hither, and we shall determine how to cut off some charges and legacies. Unbelievable. They ain't going to get 75 drachmas. After all of that, they're probably going to cut down to 55 drachmas or less. That Antony, who trumpeted this will, is the great example of Caesar's benevolent quality, now secure in power, or more secure in power, he's going to try to lessen the amount of money they have to give to the people. There's a real kind of gut-level street knowledge of politics in this scene. It's really quite remarkable. We've just had Antony, very poetic, extraordinarily rhetorical, and now we see the business end of politics. Shakespeare likes this kind of thing. In Richard II, he stages a glorious scene of a medieval tournament of chivalry at its best, and then cuts to a scene when they're working on the tax rolls and how can they make more money out of the people to finance the war in Ireland. These are juxtapositions that Shakespeare liked to achieve and to remind us kind of the dark underbelly of politics here. And indeed, in this scene, we see shaping up what was known as the second triumvirate. First triumvirate was Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar. Julius Caesar now, Octavius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Lepidus will form the second triumvirate. As you may notice, Lepidus, don't put your money on Lepidus. They're already talking about getting rid of him, and that process we will see happen in Antony and Cleopatra. We're once again at three-man rule in Rome, a triumvirate. That's what triumvirate means, come to think of it. Already we're seeing 3 will be reduced to 2, and in Antony and Cleopatra, 2 will be reduced to 1. So again, there's this sense here things have developed a momentum of their own here. We already see that Lepidus is somehow just positioned for power. He doesn't deserve it. What is it? Antony calls him a slight fellow, a barren-spirited fellow at the bottom of page 71. Who you are is becoming less important than where you are. Again, this new imperial regime has places for men who don't have great qualities, who didn't get where they are because of great military victories or any kind of virtue they displayed, but just because they're part of the wheeling and dealing. And we'll see more of that in Antony and Cleopatra. Now, Act 4 is largely devoted to the quarrel between Brutus and Cassius. Every once in a while, it comes back to me that I'm an English professor. So let me say something about dramatic structure here. That is, Shakespeare generally wrote what's known as 5-act structure, even though the division into acts may not always be the way he did it, because remember, he did not edit these plays for publication. But generally speaking, in Shakespeare, there's a first act that gives the exposition, lays out a dramatic situation. The second act is a complication. Things get a little more difficult. Things start to come into conflict. The third act in Shakespeare is the crisis. And the fifth act is the catastrophe, or as it's called in French, the denouement. That is, Shakespeare almost always in his plays places the crisis in the third act. And the crisis is the turning point in the drama. The moment when things come to a head, where the outcome is finally determined. Things in the exposition and the development, they're heading in all sorts of directions. That's why it's dramatic. That's why it's tense. That's why we're excited by it. In the third act, in some ways, the end becomes inevitable. That is, in the third act, they're either going to kill Caesar or they're not. Brutus or Antony is going to triumph in the speech. If they don't kill Caesar, the play heads off in a different direction. If they do, it heads in the direction we see. If Brutus triumphs, the play heads in a different direction. In other words, here are the turning points in the third act. Shakespeare's third acts are incredibly exciting because they involve the crisis point. And then the fifth act, it's often called the catastrophe, where things finally work themselves out. I mean, in a certain sense, after the third act, it's inevitable that Brutus and Cassius are going to lose, and that Mark Antony and Octavius are going to triumph. And we see that in the fifth act, that Octavius and Antony will lead their armies and triumph over Cassius and Brutus. And as in many catastrophes, Cassius and Brutus will die. Pretty catastrophic from their point of view, often called the denouement or the unraveling. The peculiarity of 5-act structure is the fourth act. In 5-act structure, in a way, the climax or crisis comes too soon. It comes in the middle of the play. so that the high point of dramatic tension is at the middle, and then you got a kind of delaying action. You don't go straight to the catastrophe. Shakespeare had what's often called the fourth act problem. What do you do in between the crisis and the catastrophe? And in fact, he shows his genius in his solution of the fourth act problem. In Antony and Cleopatra, you're going to see he devotes the fourth act to Antony's death and then the fifth act to Cleopatra's death. That's a very subtle solution of the problem. Hamlet, you'll see famously, the fourth act is Ophelia's act. Very often what Shakespeare will do is create a mini-drama. Have something that's off the main plot line, but is really dramatic in itself. So in Act 4, we see everything that goes wrong with Ophelia. She goes mad, and then she commits suicide. It's intensely dramatic. It consumes our interest, but Hamlet's off stage the whole time. The main plot doesn't advance at all. Here, Shakespeare has the quarrel between Brutus and Cassius, which is an intensely dramatic scene. It's absolutely superb. In the Merlin Brando version, John Gielgud plays Cassius and James Mason plays Brutus, and they really chew up the scenery in that scene. It's irrelevant to the main plot. In a way, it's counter to the main plot. The main plot is Brutus and Cassius united against Antony and Octavius Caesar. But for the fourth act, we see the tension between Brutus and Cassius. It's very effective. And again, you don't even notice it. You're not saying to yourself during that scene, gee, well, what's happening to the main plot here? That's why Shakespeare's so good as a dramatist. Again, I'm concentrating on him as a political thinker here, but I do want to keep reminding you guys, he's the greatest poet that ever lived, and by far the greatest dramatist that ever lived. And problems like this are like nothing for him to solve. Now, having said that, let's go all intellectual on the scene here. That is, in itself, again, this is very revealing. It solves a dramatic problem, but it also tells us a lot more about politics here. This is page 75 to 76, so Act 4, Scene 3. We see the problem of taking bribes. Now, this actually comes up a great deal in Plutarch, so it's not surprising that it registered on Shakespeare. But again, it suggests the constant tension between idealism and political realism in the play. And Brutus is particularly upset that they who did such a noble thing as restore the Republic are now involved in taking bribes. I won't go through the details of this argument. It's, again, dramatically, it's just brilliant, the ebb and flow of the dialogue. But I really want to call your attention to page 78, so Act 4, Scene 3, about line 65, when Brutus now says to Cassius, you have done that you should be sorry for. There is no terror, Cassius, in your threats, for I am armed so strong in honesty that they pass by me as the idle wind, which I respect not. I did send to you for certain sums of gold, which you denied me, for I can raise no money by vile means. By heaven, I'd rather coin my heart and drop my blood for drachmas than to wring from the hard hands of peasants their vile trash by any direction. This is what I was alluding to when I said earlier that Brutus lacks self-knowledge. This is an extraordinary moment to condemn Cassius for taking bribes and then condemn him for not sharing with you the fruits of those bribes. You see an awful lot about Brutus here, and above all, the lack of self-knowledge, the self-righteousness of it all. I am armed so strong in honesty. And again, I can raise no money by vile means. You can raise money by vile means, but be sure to give me the share of that money. Again, it's easy on a surface reading of the play to see Brutus as the noblest Roman of them all, and Cassius as this morally suspect and ignoble figure. But I think Shakespeare makes a point here of showing that, in fact, There's an element of facade to Brutus's nobility. Remember that just a little later in the scene, on pages 81 to 83, Brutus goes into his Stoicism act, where he poses as Stoic. And also in this scene, we have, this on page 80, the poet who tries to intervene, and Brutus throws him out. Cassius kind of laughs at him, but Brutus is really nasty. I'll know as you, this is bottom of page 80, so about line 135, Act 4, Scene 3. I'll know his humor when he owes his time. What should the wars do with the jigging fools? It's interesting that the Republican side of Rome is not happy with poets. They just ripped Cinna, the poet, apart. And now this poet who tries to come in and reconcile these angry men. The great emphasis in this scene is on the collar of Cassius. Cassius gets really angry, but Brutus gets really angry too. And the poet tries to reconcile them. It's interesting, in Plutarch, this figure is a philosopher. I think this is page 130 of your edition. He's actually named in Plutarch. It's about 10 lines down on page 130. Notwithstanding one Marcus Phaeonius, that had been a friend and a follower of Cato while he lived, and took upon him to counterfeit a philosopher, not with wisdom and discretion, but a certain bedlam and frank motion, and so on. Again, I'm looking at hints in these plays that the Republican Rome, the city in general, excludes philosophers. People who show up questioning the ways of the political man in the city, they tend to be treated nastily. It's interesting, Nietzsche will be coming up in this course, and I always like to show off that I can spell his name. Has a little aphorism about this scene. He reads it as a scene of self-hatred on Shakespeare's part, that Shakespeare secretly despised poets, and so he treats them shabbily in play. I read it just the opposite, that it's not a good sign about Brutus that he tosses out the poet here. It sure, again, in some ways, I've already been suggesting, Republican Rome lacks poetry. It lacks this non-political dimension of life that poets are in touch with, poets who are dreamers, like Cinna. These Republican Romans don't listen to other, they don't listen to soothsayers, they don't listen to poets. Now we're going to see something very different happen in Antony and Cleopatra, and it's not so great there either, but it is interesting, yeah. The next page, Cassius says, of your philosophy you make no use. You just beat up on some poor poet here. I think, again, Shakespeare is delaying things here. He's got to take time here to let the military plot mature, but he's scoring some interesting points here in the fourth act as well. Any questions about that? Yes?
You said initially that it's rhetoric by which should have this reason exchange.
Yeah.
But then you come to say that this Republican Rome does not listen.
Yeah. Yeah, well, exactly. The reasoning is always colored by politics, so that we see, for example, that they appropriate philosophies to political purposes, and Greek Stoicism becomes something different in Rome, and Greek Epicureanism, and so on. I'm not trying to set up Republican Rome. I'm glad you asked the question. I'm not trying to set it up as a graduate seminar in philosophy. It's not that horrifying. That is it. But there's a difference between appealing to reasons, publicly defensible principles that people can agree on, and just appealing to emotion. That's one distinction I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to claim that Republican Rome was Plato's republic. It was not ruled by philosopher kings, and indeed we see the other side of it here, that figures like Cassius and Brutus, I won't quite say they claim to be philosopher kings, but they claim to be political men informed by a philosophy, and that turns out to be pretty phony in a way here. The philosophy is somehow superficial. Other questions? Okay, let's turn to the fifth act to see how that works out, because it really is interesting to see how Brutus and Cassius end. We've turned to page 92. We've already talked about this speech, but I'll go over it again now in its proper dramatic context here. It is really interesting that Shakespeare chooses to load up these final scenes, Brutus and Cassius, with references to philosophy. That is, page 92, which would be Act 5, Scene 1, about line 70. Messala, this is my birthday. This very day was Cassius born. Give me thy hand, Messala. Be thou my witness that against my will as Pompey was, am I compelled to set upon one battle all liberties, again because he's been forced to listen to Brutus and do what Brutus said to do. You know that I held Epicurus strong in his opinion. Now I change my mind and partly credit things that do presage. And it is interesting. I looked this up in Plutarch, and the business about Epicurus is there, but the issue is not things that do presage. In Plutarch, Cassius says something about Epicurean beliefs about signs, but still Shakespeare puts the emphasis on omens here, and indeed it's another case of a Roman who once thought one way is now thinking the other way. And in any case, the point is that at a crucial moment, he's not relying on the philosophy he professes. And Brutus is the same way. On page 93. Cassius is going to raise a serious question now, basically. Do we commit suicide if we lose? And so line 97, he asks Brutus if we do lose this battle. And Brutus begins, even by the rule of that philosophy by which I did blame Cato. Now let me first point out, it's an interesting rule. In a way, Brutus is the kind of person who wants philosophy to give him rules. You might say that is already a defective understanding of philosophy, as if philosophy issued in 10 commandments, let's say. Philosophy gives, in the deepest sense, gives us ways of understanding the world. It doesn't give except on the New York Times bestseller list, it doesn't give us rules by which to live, sort of thing. It's interesting that he uses that phrase there. And then he says, even by the rule of that philosophy, by which I did blame Cato for the death which he did give myself, I know not how, but I do find it cowardly and vile, for fear of what might fall. So to prevent this time of life, arming myself with patience to say the province of some high powers that govern us below. So he basically says here, it begins by saying, I'm philosophically opposed to suicide. But then, Cassius is a bit shocked, top of 94. Then if we lose this battle, you are contented to be led in triumph through the streets of Rome. No, Cassius, no. And again, it shows how shallow the commitment of these Romans is to philosophy. Brutus says, this is the rule of philosophy, but by the way, philosophy tells me you shouldn't kill yourself. But by the way, rather than be led in triumph Rome, I'm going to kill myself. But this same day must end that work, the Ides of March begun. Now, this is another interesting moment with regard to the source in Plutarch. I really want to call your attention to something quite important here. This is, if you got the signet, turn to page 134 to 5, bottom of 134. Now, again, go up about 10 lines on 134. I trust, I know not how, a certain rule of philosophy by the which I did greatly blame, reprove Cato for killing himself. I want you to see Shakespeare's, again, working from Plutarch here, almost line by line. For if it be not the will of God that this battle fall out fortune for us, I will look no more for hope, neither seek to make any new supply for war again, but will rid me of this miserable world and content me with my fortune. For I gave up my life for my country in the Ides of March, for the which I shall live in another more glorious world. And Shakespeare must have done a double take when he hit that line there, with Brutus believing in an afterlife. I shall live in another more glorious world. In Shakespeare, that's completely omitted here. All we get is, but this same day must end that work the Ides of March begun. Shakespeare somehow understood that there was something wrong to have Brutus as a pagan Roman refer to the afterlife, I shall live in another more glorious world. Now, in fact, it is a mistranslation. Sir Thomas North was not even working from the original Greek. He was translating this book from a French translation of the Greek. So this is an English translation of a French translation of the Greek. So not so surprising that errors might occur. This is what the original Greek says, though it's in English translation. In Plutarch, in Greek, what Brutus says is, on the Ides of March, I gave my own life to my country, and since then, for her sake, I have lived another life of liberty and glory. So in Plutarch, Brutus isn't referring to the afterlife, he's referring to the afterlife of the conspiracy. That ever since we killed Caesar, I've been living another life of liberty and glory. Not, I shall live in another more glorious world. Shakespeare, I'm not claiming that with his little Greek he went back and checked the Greek here, but it's pretty remarkable that he at least intuited the mistranslation here and made a point of correcting it. I stress this because it's in line with his systematic exclusion of thoughts of the afterlife in Republican Rome. Because again, it is crucial to the functioning of the Republic that the only path to immortality should be through military and political glory and therefore fame. Watch for the afterlife in Antony and Cleopatra. It's going to creep in. But this is a wonderful example of seeing how systematically Shakespeare excludes it from Republican Rome, that even when it was served up to him on a silver platter in the North translation, he made a point of getting it out of there. What we're seeing here now, the fifth act is devoted a lot to suicide. Cassius kills himself, then Brutus kills himself. This is, again, as I said in my introductory lecture, this is very characteristic of Shakespeare's Romans, that they commit suicide as an act of honor. They do not wish to be conducted shamefully as the captives of their conquerors. And again, this is very definitive of being Roman. It's why Horatio will say, I'm more an antique Roman than a Dane. It's why Macbeth will say, why should I play the Roman fool and die upon my own sword? Shakespeare really associates this kind of suicide with the Romans, and it's in a way a very dangerous predisposition and becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. In the case of Cassius, he's been building up to this moment almost from the beginning of the play. He is indeed too apt to commit suicide, too eager. Page 21, Act 1, Scene 3. When he thinks Caesar's going to be made king, so about line 89, Act 1, Scene 3. I know where I will wear this dagger then. Cassius from bondage will deliver Cassius. There in your gods you make the weak most strong. There in your gods you tyrants do defeat. This is the ethos behind Roman suicide. It's a way of exerting self-mastery. It comes up again on page 47. So Act 3, Scene 1. Just before the conspiracy goes into action, Act 3, Scene 1, about line 19, they're a little worried at how Popilius Lena looks, and Cassius says, "A casket be sudden, for we fear prevention. Brutus, what shall be done? If this be known, Cassius or Caesar shall never turn back, for I will slay myself." And indeed, he does prematurely slay himself because his eyesight's not good. In fact, Titinius was being embraced by friends. Cassius thinks he's being overwhelmed by enemies, and this suicide is not inconsequential. They were not savagely defeated on this first day of battle. But the Epicurean has indeed grown superstitious of late. Page 96. So Act 5, Scene 3, about line 23. This day I breathed first, time has come round, and where I did begin, there shall I end. My life is run his compass. You know, it's a kind of superstitious notion. It's my birthday. Gee, maybe it should be my death day. You know, this is morbid thinking here. And indeed, what we see a lot of in this play is morbid thinking and a sense of inevitability. And I want you to see, this is the counterweight to Cassius's original saying, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. Now, his death is almost astrological here. You know, gee, my horoscope says, good day to commit suicide today, so he goes with it. Remember, Julius Caesar, surprisingly, for he is superstitious grown of late, Cassius himself says, you know, now I credit things that do presage. He didn't believe in fate as a Republican Roman. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars. But at this point, he's a beaten man and he's beaten down. And one thing you see in this play is the emergence of fatalism among the characters. It will become the prevailing spirit of the empire, because what we're seeing is the decommissioning of human agency here. The Republic was a world where people thought life was in their hands. Fortune is with the followers, not with the flyers. The gods help those who help themselves was the principle of the Republic. Now there's this overwhelming sense of passivity developing among characters, that things are just taking their course and they are too big for us. There's nothing we can do about them. Page 43, this is the end of Act 2, Scene 3. Artemidorus is going to try to warn Caesar, but line 15, if thou read this, O Caesar, thou mayst live. If not, the fates with traitors do contrive. And the fates do start to become important now in this play. Page 50, Act 3, Scene 1, about line 98. After the murder of Caesar, where's Antony? Fled to his house amazed. Men, wives, and children stare, cry, and run as if it were doomsday. Fates, we will know your pleasures. That we shall die, we know. 'Tis but the time and drawing days out that men stand upon. This echoes Julius Caesar's famous statement about cowards die many times before the day of their death. But fate, we will know your pleasures. That's a new attitude that develops as Republican Rome slips into imperial Rome here. I showed it to you in Antony's speech where he says, mischief do thy work. There's a strong sense that develops in this play that there are forces beyond human control. And the most famous example of this is on page 84. So Act 4, Scene 3. Brutus speaking, another one of these examples where he countermands Cassius. Plutarch points out that Cassius' strategy was right. They should have pursued delaying tactics under the circumstances, but no, Brutus wants a battle down. And why? Line 217 in Act 4, Scene 3, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted all the voyager of life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. Go with the flow. This is very different than Cassius is saying the faulty Brutus is not on our stars. Really, the idea here is there are these forces. We either catch a wave and we're sitting on top of the world, or we miss it and we've lost forever. This is what I mean when I speak of a developing passivity in the world of the play. Or page 94, this is the end of Act 5, Scene 1, about line 122, where Brutus says, why then lead on, oh, that a man might know the end of this day's business ere it come. You never see Coriolanus say, gee, I wonder how the battle's going to turn out. He knows how it's going to turn out. He's going to win. He doesn't need predictions. That's why, uncharacteristically in Coriolanus, the Roman soldiers don't turn to the augurs to get predictions. But I want you to look for how this attitude, oh, that a man might know the end of this day's business ere it come, how that attitude prevails in Antony and Cleopatra. It is the sense now that things are predestined, that they're going to happen no matter what we do. So wouldn't it be nice to know ahead of time what's going to happen? And this strong sense of the end in the play, that something is coming to an end, doomsday. Now what's coming to the end is the Republic. We know that. But there's a strong sense that that means the end of Rome itself. And that's very important, has enormous implications for Antony and Cleopatra. If you'll turn to page 97, Titinius's reaction to Cassius's death. This is Act 5, Scene 3, so about line 60. But Cassius is no more, O setting sun. There's a prevailing mood of doomsday and setting sun in this play. As in thy red rays thou dost sink tonight, so in his red blood Cassius's day is set, the sun of Rome is set, our day is gone. Now, you can call this funeral rhetoric. You kind of build up the guy when you're speaking at his funeral. And yet, think of the implications of this. There's a sense here that Rome is running out of men. And indeed, it's the same thing that Brutus says, page 98, so Act 5, Scene 3, when he sees Cassius dead, so this is Act 5, Scene 3, about line 98. Are yet two Romans living such as these, the last of all the Romans fare thee well. It is impossible that ever Rome shall breed thy fellow. By the way, the line 110, we shall try fortune in a second fight. There's a sense here that Republican Rome is Rome, and that the death of the Republic is the death of Rome, and that the empire is a corpse. Now, I'll just offer the suggestion that this seems to be the way Shakespeare feels about things, that he identifies Romanness with the Republic. And very little of Romanness will survive into the empire, as I think you'll see in Antony and Cleopatra. There's a strong sense of desperation here. It surfaced earlier in Cassius's speech when Julius Caesar was dominating Rome, and he said, when has it ever been that we had only one man? Remember, this is a city that prided itself on consuls stacked up end to end in the back room of Rome. You know, we're the city that has 40 leaders. We don't have to depend upon one man. And the fear Cassius initially expresses, man, we now are completely dependent on this one man, Julius Caesar. What happens to him? And indeed, you know, Antony says over Julius Caesar's corpse, you know, the ruins of the noblest man that ever strode in the tide of times. And now, look at page 104. Antony says of Brutus, this is Act 5, Scene 5, line 68, this was the noblest Roman of them all. That's pretty bad for Rome then, because the noblest Roman of them all is dead. By the way, notice Caesar was the noblest man. In a way, a much bigger term than the noblest Roman. But we've lost the noblest man. We've lost the noblest Roman. We lost a lot here. This is a Pyrrhic victory, as we'd say here in Rome. There's a strong sense that the race of Romans is running out, because that means the race of Republican Romans. And that's going to prove very problematic in Antony and Cleopatra. Now, let me look at one last speech here that will set the tone for our discussion of Antony and Cleopatra. It's on page 102. Brutus, so it's Act 5, Scene 5, about line 35. Brutus's almost dying words here. Countrymen, my heart doth joy that yet in all my life I've found no man, but he was true to me. I shall have more glory by this losing day, more than Octavius and Mark Antony by this vile conquest. This is a profound change in a Republican Roman here. My heart doth joy that yet in all my life I found no man, but he was true to me. Brutus here is placing all his emphasis on the personal here. The thing that he can feel proud of at this last moment is that everybody was always loyal to him. Now, if you'll turn to page 141, if you've got the signet, the bottom of 141, you'll see what the speech was in Plutarch. Again, it's so wonderful in these plays that we have Shakespeare's source and can see what he's doing. This is the exact same moment, and you'll hear again how Shakespeare's following Plutarch. Bottom of 141, it rejoices my heart that not one of my friends hath failed me at my need. There it is. It rejoiceth my heart that not one of my friends hath failed me. And I do not complain of my fortune, but only for my country's sake. And that Shakespeare drops. As you might have expected, to the end, Brutus was a patriot in Plutarch. That what upset him is I blew it. I didn't save Rome. But Shakespeare omits that. And now the formula is not that my soldiers loved Rome less, but they loved me more. The good of Rome has dropped out in Brutus's speech here. The focus of his funeral oration in Act 3 was on the good of Rome, on patriotism. And now in his dying moment, well, it's pretty tough for him to refer to patriotism here because he has failed to save the Republic. And so he turns inward here. And my heart the joy that yet in all my life I found no man, but he is true to me. I shall have glory in this losing day more than Octavius and Mark Antony by this vile conquest. And the juxtaposition of losing day and vile conquest there is incredibly important because it's a fundamental transformation in Roman ethic here. Can you imagine Coriolanus saying, I will have glory in this losing day? The Republican ethic is an ethic of winners, for good or ill, but that's what it is. You can retreat tactically to live and fight another day, things like that. But basically the goal of a Roman warrior is to win a battle. And that's how you get glory. But now the idea is that conquest is vile. That the loser will have more glory than the winner today. Sour grapes. Anybody hear sour grapes here? But it's a very interesting moment here, in a way prefigured when Antony said over Caesar's body, is this that's all left of your conquests? This butchered piece of earth? What I'm saying is, in the course of this play, the notion of vile conquest emerges. And that's a fundamental overturning of Roman Republican ethics. Remember, it is held that valor is the chiefest virtue. Conquest is noble for Romans. Losing, not so good. Losing is vile for a Republican Roman, and conquering is good. But it's under these tremendous pressures. They are the pressures of failure, of seeing Brutus's great dream go up in smoke, of restoring the Republic. He now says glory is to be found in a losing day, and conquest is merely vile. Now, as you read Antony and Cleopatra, keep that in mind, because that changed the idea that losing is winning, that defeat is victory, that vileness is nobility. You're going to see that all throughout Antony and Cleopatra, and why this imperial regime is more than just a change in politics, but is a fundamental change in the way things do in the world. And again, this play was written possibly 10 years before Antony and Cleopatra, but I find it astounding that Shakespeare had set up this idea right now in Brutus that comes to dominate the world of Antony and Cleopatra. So we will start on Antony and Cleopatra next time, and we will start to explore how an empire differs politically from a republic, but in more general terms, how it seems even to remake human nature.